What is going on, ProGuides family? It is your host, Sergeant Frost, and today we'll be discussing how and when you should be using the Vandal, what makes the Vandal good, and why you should or shouldn't play it on different maps. By the end of this video, hopefully you should have a pretty good idea on how the gun is best operated, and how you can even squeeze some more value out of it by picking the right fights. So without further ado, make sure to like and subscribe, and let's get straight into it. So before anything else, let's quickly discuss the Vandal itself. The Vandal is one of two 2,900 credit rifles, the other one being the Phantom, which we also covered in a guide just a few days ago. There being two choices of the same price results in anyone having played Valorant for more than even a couple games wondering, what's better, the Vandal or the Phantom? Generally, the Phantom has been winning this debate as it shines on most maps, and is slightly better than the Vandal in most fights. But the Vandal definitely does have its own set of strengths that, when used well, can seem simply unstoppable to the enemies. The Phantom has one major flaw, and that's damage fall off. At close range, there's no debate, both guns are one-shot headshot, so the strengths of the Phantom still shine. But at mid to long ranges, the Phantom requires a head plus body shot, and eventually you'll start needing multiple, making the Vandal stronger and stronger as the range gets longer. Essentially, at close range, the Phantom wins out, but as soon as the distance starts kicking in, you kick out the gun as well, and pick up a Vandal instead. Luckily though, as Valorant is a game where you can position yourself, you can play around that somewhat easily. But don't worry, we'll go more in depth about that in a moment. Additionally, when it comes to playstyle, the Vandal is all about headshots, specifically one-shot headshots. Because of that, you want to go looking for the range, while also trying to avoid operators like the Plague. As a Vandal player, you love to fight long-range fights against Phantoms, and the longer the range the better. But always remember that operators should and probably will trump you as long as they don't horribly whiff. Also, because of this headshot-oriented playstyle, it's important that you look for headshot angles more than you would with other guns. Headshot angles are always pretty good, as you can get sprayed down easily, but on a Vandal there's something else entirely. All you need is one shot, and depending on your opponent's gun of choice, they either need the same amount or at least double that. So, cherry picking your fights is a huge part of making the Vandal work for you. This is something that players have a hard time doing at times. So if you're looking to build up on the fundamentals to put yourself in the best positions for success, you gotta check us out at ProGuides.com, where our Radiant and Immortal level coaches will not only teach you their rank secrets, but also build up your skill set so you can compete with the best. Link is in the description if you're interested. First, let's talk about two maps where honestly the Vandal is just the clear victor. For that, we have Breeze and Icebox for very similar reasons. On Breeze, the reason for the Vandal is super simple, as almost every fight you'll run into on this map will be at least outside of the Phantom's one-shot range, and probably even further than that, which of course means that the Vandal is better. Breeze is just a super open map, and fights that are close are hard to come by, and impossible to rely on consistently taking. As such, running a Phantom on Breeze for the most part is just a clear disadvantage. Perhaps if you're playing close up on B you can get away with it, especially if you're playing around some sort of utility, like perhaps a Viper ultimate. But for the most part, running a Phantom on Breeze is simply subprime and not to be recommended. On Icebox, essentially the same thing applies, but it's a lot more nuanced. The map does have a lot more close quarters, but most of the time you don't end up taking fights there anyways. The majority of fights you'll be taking on Icebox are Vandal fights, and as such, a Vandal is what you should probably prefer. The one place where perhaps a Phantom is arguably better is when you're defending A site, and you aren't ever peeking aggressively into Bell. But even then, you wouldn't want to limit yourself to only fighting close angles on site, would you? Basically, on both Icebox and Breeze, Vandal is a clear-cut choice, and you don't have to worry about fights you plan on taking. But on the other maps, finding the best Vandal angles requires a bit more planning in order to really make people doubt their gun of choice. But before we do that, let's quickly get to our question of the day. Today's question being, what's your favorite Vandal skin? Personally for me, I have a couple of favorites. Those favorites being the Forsaken, the Sentinels of Light, and the Reaver. Not only do those skins look cool and they have some of the best pullout and reload animations available, those guns have a specific advantage because they do have very bright tracers that can be seen very easily across the map. This is actually a well-known visual trick to help you control recoil better for those of you that don't have the recoil patterns somewhat memorized. Seeing those bright tracers in whatever color you choose can help you just keep track of your aim a lot better, so I prefer using those skins. Let us know what your favorite Vandal skins are in the comment section down below. But let's get back to talking about the maps. First off, let's discuss Fracture. On Fracture, your gun of choice really depends on what you plan on doing that specific round and in general. If you're playing defense and you are a rotator, meaning that means you play closer to spawn so you can quickly help out A or B depending on what's needed, then yeah, a Vandal will treat you better. The fights you'll be taking are going to be longer range, as it's all the way from spawn to any of the other main entrances. So for example, B link to main or gen to tower, but also A link to the main or A rope to drop. In these types of fights, you're going to want a Vandal, and since you're playing these 4 positions mainly, at least as a rotator, Vandal is the better choice. On attack, the gun is of course also quite viable. Maybe don't take it to drop, but if you're pushing B main, arcade to sight, or A main, well, it's a pretty good choice. Mind you, on attack, you don't have full control over the range you actually end up fighting, as your opponents can always play super passive. But even if they do, at least you're allowed to take a lot of map control, which probably is even better anyways. On Ascent, you usually want a Phantom, as most fights are short to medium range, but a Vandal isn't terrible either. There is one area of the map where the Vandal is clearly better than a Phantom, and that would be mid. But with that being said, over on mid there is another gun that also trumps the Vandal, and that's the Operator. Essentially, if you're able to fight Phantoms mid on Ascent, you're in a great spot. But if they refuse and simply greet you with an AWP, well, your crosshair placement better be on point, or better luck next round. Haven is quite similar in the sense that there is a definite AWPing presence, especially on the angles that would be considered strong with the Vandal. But since there's many angles and generally only a single operator, it's not too bad to take these type of fights. Here, we're talking especially angles like window to B, but also A lobby to long, and C long to sight. Basically, whenever you take one of these medium to long range fights, going a Vandal is just better. I mean, obviously, but you also have to watch out for operators, so jiggling or jump spotting the angles first is recommended. On defense, for the most part, you're going to want to have a Phantom over a Vandal, unless you plan on pushing. Reason being is that if you push aggressively on defense, well then the likelihood of you taking a long range fight of some sorts in the enemy spawn is quite high. And again, long range means Vandal ace. On bind, there definitely aren't a lot of opportunities to use the Vandal. It's a heavily Phantom dominated map, and as such you almost never want to play with the Vandal there. Although of course there are a few key exceptions. If you're fighting on either of the 2 extremities, you want to rock that Vandal over the alternative, that being showers to TP and also B long to fountains. On defense, you can also get away with playing it if you plan on taking one of the 2 aforementioned peaks, or also if you want to play backside B, fighting garden and hookah, or a place like A Haven holding showers and short. Like always, just keep the range and the Vandal will show its strengths. Now, last but not least, Split. Split is probably the strongest map for Phantoms, and as such, playing a Vandal here is generally pretty pointless. I'd only ever really take it to A, as you do have long fights from main to spawn and from ramp to heaven, but that would probably be the only place where you can reliably find advantageous fights. Generally, just don't use a Vandal on Split. It's probably where the gun is weakest, and it's rarely never worth using it over the Phantom. So now that you know your way around the maps, let's go over some tips specifically for the Vandal. Firstly, 2-round bursts are your absolute friend. The Vandal requires headshots to be successful, and spraying and praying is absolutely not the way to achieve this. You could make an argument for tapping, but honestly, short bursts are just as accurate as taps, while also increasing the bullets you're putting out. Even if you miss the head with the first 2 bullets, and instead hit the body, a quick counter strafe and a new burst will already finish a person off, instead of having to go through 2 more rounds of firing. But even if you are bursting, you should always still focus on hitting heads, as that's what the gun is all about. Because of that, you need to first be able to stay calm, and remember that even if you get hit or your opponent starts shooting first, you can turn any fight, as long as you hit the single shot in the right spot. Next, don't always try to shoot first. Basically, take your time. If you feel like it could help you, peek a bit wider so that you have more time to adjust, or simply aim more calmly. Body shots are so Phantom. All we care about is headshots. Being good at this is crucial because the Vandal requires discipline to master. Another reason for why staying calm is important is because with the Vandal, you have less moving accuracy than with other guns, meaning your movement will have to be completely still and your counter strafe on point. So rushing your movement will not only make it so that you're going to be aiming for heads less, but also even if you are aiming perfectly, you'll still miss as your movements just might be slightly off. Having bad movement with the Vandal will waste your opportunities more than you could probably tell at first. So having this aspect of your game on point is super important. So yeah, really make sure you're working on it in the range, in death matches, but also in ranked, simply by remaining calm and taking your time to hit heads. Also, something to consider is that Vandals love 1v1s. The Phantom is pretty good at spraying, but versing multiple targets with the Vandal is usually a speedy ticket back to spawn. This makes duelists that are great at seeking 1v1s and getting out of bad fights even better with the Vandal, like for example Jet and Reyna. Both are excellent at getting into fights and getting out as soon as things go south. So if you're playing a duelist with a Vandal, getting into these fights is pretty much your goal. 1v1s are pretty favorable as long as they are at some range, and even if you suddenly get peeked by multiple players, all you need to do is dismiss and dash out. If you're not a duelist though, you need to make sure that you're cherry picking your fights in order to be on the favorable end. Well guys, that's gotta be it for now. Hopefully you got something from this guide and are better able to identify when and how you should be using a Vandal. The Vandal perhaps isn't as strong as the Phantom in most cases, but it definitely has its moments where it can just dominate matches, so make sure to play around its quirks and you should really see some good results. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content, and also come check us out at ProGuides.com for coaching from our Radiant and Immortal players. It's been your host Sergeant Frost, and good luck on the grind.